Hey everybody, welcome back to Sounds Like a Drum, Kane's independent media production. Today, we are finally getting to tackle something that's been driving me crazy. Drumming faux pas that aren't rim shots on the toms. Now, before we even get into this, we're not just going to do rim shots on the toms. We're going to do a few faux pas on the toms, but this is the one that I do all the time and that a lot of my favorite drummers utilize to great effect, that as soon as you step on the internet or the message boards or the comment sections, we're supposedly not allowed to do this. And as soon as somebody says you're not allowed to do something, especially with your instrument, it's time to talk about it. The first time that this really got brought to our attention in a direct way was an episode a while back where we were talking about drum set ergonomics, angles, making sure that you can get everything out of the kit that you want based on your playing style. And I said, I like to angle my drums in such a way that it's easy for me to hit rim shots on all of them with both of my hands. And people were not ready for that at all. And I was really surprised because in my little bubble of drummers that I'm friends with and music that I listen to, it's a thing that happens from time to time. Some drummers more, some less. But the idea that a snare drum is a drum with rims on it and a tom is a drum with rims on it, and we're supposed to be able to hit consistent rim shots on a snare, and then we're never, ever, ever, ever supposed to catch the rim on the toms, is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Like, if it's a sound you like, just like anything else, then it's a sound you like, and you should do whatever you want with that. Let's listen to a little bit of playing. We're going to do a few different stylistic and other sorts of demos here, but let's listen a little bit first right now to what this sounds like integrated into a groove. Now that we've had some context, we're going to do a quick comparison between regular old strikes in the center of the drum and then rim shots right after. Now, as you can hear in isolation, these are two different sounds. One has more low end, one has more attack, just like when you do it on a snare drum. There are, of course, things to take into account in terms of tuning and, head choices and stuff with the toms. We're not going to dive into that too much, but suffice to say, you have to think about those things on a snare drum too. If you're tuning it gut bucket low, you're probably not hitting rim shots. You're probably going for a muffly fatback sound anyway. So it's really not even apples and oranges. It's the same conversation. Now, for anyone who hears this and says, I'm not into that sound, that's absolutely fine. That's not what we're talking about here. If you don't dig it, that's totally fine. We all have things we like and don't like. On the other hand, if you are afraid of this for any number of mythological reasons, like you're going to damage your rims or whatever, that's where we want to talk. Because if you're hearing this and you go, oh, that's a rad sound, but I'm not sure if I want to do it or if I can do it or if I know how to do it, this is exactly where we like to live. This is exploration time. This is, how do I use this sound? Where would I put this sound? Do I want it all the time or once in a while or with one of the bands I play with or with some of the practicing that I'm doing? The world is your oyster with the toms, just like it is with the snare drum and the rest of it. Things to think about before we get too far into this in terms of stuff to watch out for. Toms are generally tuned lower than snare drums, and so the possibility of them detuning a little bit in the course of a lot of rim shots is more likely. It's probably definitely going to happen. So if you like to tune low and you also want to experiment with rim shots, this is a time to pull out some lug locks or at least pay attention to how those are moving and see if you're getting any kind of loss of tension just in the lugs underneath where you're striking the drum. The second thing is hoop choice. Now, we have the triple flange on these drums today. We also have die cast for these, which, depending on what I'm doing, I actually would prefer die cast batter hoops if I know I'm going to be doing a lot of this kind of playing, mainly because there's a little bit more of a point on the rim shot, just like with the snare drum. That said, totally works with triple flange. It gets a bigger, warmer, and maybe more overtone laden sound, but no problem there at all. It's going to be a little bit of a different feel, a little bit of a different sound. Again, feel free to experiment, but don't feel like you need certain hoops or certain drums to mess with this. The way we have the drums tuned today is a little bit higher than we normally would tune them for pop and rock and things like that, but they're still definitely in the low mid range of what these drums are capable of. Because we've pitched them up a little bit, the center strike on the heads has a little bit less articulation than if they were tuned lower and slappier, which means for us, in the same way that you might swap out a wooden beater for a felt or a felt for a fluffy one to get a little more articulation, we can now have this really melodic sound when we play the center of the drum and utilize the rim shot as our accent, where if we were tuned super low, we could just hit it harder in the center and get a more aggressive sound. In terms of origin stories for how I came to playing this way, there's one side of it which is trying to study stick-less percussion, hand percussion, any kind of indigenous music where the drums are not being struck with traditional drumsticks, but more like accents, slaps, and things like that, where you have an open tone in the center of the drum, like a conga, for example, and then various other slap tones to get you a more articulate, brighter, louder accent sound. This, for me, has led to a lot of opportunities to play like a percussionist on the drum set and get away from the idea that each of these drums makes one sound and how hard I hit it is just sort of a volume meter, but it's just the one sound. This is also how I arrived at being a four-piece kit person. I used to play with a lot more toms, and over time and playing shows with less of them, I realized that I have a higher sound in the floor tom if I start to utilize the rim that lives between these two. And then I have one that's a little higher feeling than this by utilizing rims here. So I get all the mileage and variety dynamically and in terms of these kind of pitch relationships out of two drums that I could have with four for the music that I like to make. Now, in addition to rim shots on the toms, there are lots of other things that we're not supposed to do on the toms. I think of things like rolls, because they're tuned so low. It's difficult to do double stroke rolls and a lot of rudiments on a really low tuned drum. I say, let's flip the script and say that we have easy, medium, and hard, and we should spend time on rudiments and rolls on all of the drums and treat it as like weight training, where if you can play your rudiments on the floor tom, you're going to have an even easier time doing them on the snare. Your headroom's going to get higher, and it also means that you'll get comfortable with the feel of that drum, so you can open up possibilities in stickings and rudimental playing in your fills that might have been relegated to the snare drum, where you would then just switch to singles when you get to the toms. Additionally, we can do some pitch bendy things on the rack tom. We can do dead stick stuff on the floor tom. Get into whatever sound we can possibly find in there that doesn't include adding another drum to the setup that's going to just be one more sound that we're not going to explore. When I'm playing things like samba or maybe some like African influenced things on the drum set, I want to be able to bring in sounds that are edging toward authenticity for those musics and make sure that I'm paying as much homage to the original sounds as I possibly can. This means that if I'm getting a surdo, a Brazilian bass drum sensation from what I'm doing, dead sticking on the floor tom is very similar to the way that those drums are played, where one hand has a mallet and one hand is periodically muting the drum to get a closed tone and then an open tone. And then at the same time, I can do talking drum stuff on the rack tom by pressing a stick into it while I play and bending the pitch to just give us a sensation of these kinds of things inside of the music that I'm responsible for. It is terribly important to mention that this is not exclusive to any particular music. This isn't a jazz idea. This isn't a Latin idea. These are sounds that can evoke a feeling. And making music, for me and for a lot of us, is about evoking a feeling. So if you don't listen to Brazilian music and you don't make Latin sounds on the kit or reference them ordinarily, but maybe you've heard some music that has a little taste of that in there. If you like Massive Attack, or if you like, the work that Matt Chamberlain does on pop records with even some of those authentic instruments, this is a chance to get excited about these sounds and not just say, that's not how you hit a floor tom. Because none of the guys we love, Manu Katché, there's so many people, they don't sit there and go, that's not how you hit a floor tom. They say, I want to explore sound. I want to make music. I want to elicit a feeling. Full stop. Now, let's get a little more experimental with this. Let's put the sticks away and let's get some other kinds of implements that have their own possibilities on the whole kit, moving between floor tom, rack tom, snare drum, rim shots, not rim shots. One of my favorite things about brooms is that they get such a beautifully quiet, articulate sound on the heads when you don't catch the rims. But then when you do catch the rims, you don't really hear a rim shot, you just hear the full sound of the drum, which means if you do what I do and oftentimes use these in lieu of being able to play hand percussion-y sounds, this is so much bigger than it is if you only play in the centers, because it literally makes a bigger sound without getting too bright. It doesn't add clickiness or anything that's going to cut through too much. It just fills it out beautifully. Now, granted, I have wrecked a few pairs of brooms doing this kind of thing on gigs. They're not as tough as wooden sticks, but the sound is worth it as far as I'm concerned, and I really wouldn't have it any other way. Brushes are another animal. Like, we think of them as swishy things. We think of them often as being relegated to jazz, but what if we think of them as an opportunity to play legato texture on the whole kit and explore the sustain of the overtones that these things can bring out that sticks maybe won't? Additionally, with brushes, we are bringing the volume level down of everything just in terms of how much sound we're getting relative to the velocity of the implement toward the drum. So you can play groove stuff, you can play pocket stuff, you can play really ambient things with it. It's all going to live at a lower threshold, even if we are utilizing the rims. To go one step further into faux pas land, we could have all of these implements at our disposal. We could add mallets in and other things, and then we could hold different implements in each hand, on top of adding rim shots to the mix, turning the snares off, getting as ambient and textural as we want to get. There's no wrong way to do this as long as the sound is making you happy. And if it's not making you happy, change it up until it is. If you're watching this and thinking, I only play aggressive music, I only play loud, my volume level is generally very high, is any of this going to matter for me? Is any of this going to carry? this is an opportunity to check out the moments in the music you're making where there is space for this kind of thing. I very rarely hear music where it is dimed the whole time. There's air in there, and these are things that can live in that spot too. It doesn't have to be what your playing is about. It can be very small, it can be intro, it can be outro, it can be a little break in the center, whatever it is. And even if this isn't a thing that you use when you go out and perform, it's still an opportunity to explore the instrument on your own time and see if there's things in there that you haven't discovered yet. Even if you never use it in a live scenario, it may inspire something else unrelated that will change your playing for the better. All right, thanks so much for coming along on this maybe long-winded monologue of mine about rim shots on the toms and making sure that we pay attention to these things and let them teach us what they can do. We would love to know if you have experimented with rim shots on the toms, and also if you have never done it and are checking it out right now with us, because there are a lot of things like this that players out there have been utilizing for years, unbeknownst to us, in soundtracks and on pop records that we wouldn't even know they were doing. And this is how we find our way to those things that make us happy. And as always, please like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. And please follow the link to the Patreon below, because it is the best way to make sure that we can continue to make these videos for you, do these explorations, tell stories, build a community, and try and get people to play rim shots on their toms.